आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम। नगर नगर ये ग्राम और ये गलियारे, भरने इनमें नवजीवन के उजियारे। नगर नगर ये ग्राम और ये गलियारे, भरने इनमें नवजीवन के उजियारे। बार बार हम दोहराते हैं यही कसम, यही कसम, यही कसम। आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम। खंडों की धारा है, हमें हटाना घर घर से अंधियारा है, हमें तोड़नी पाखंडों की धारा है। सच को कहने वाली चलती रहे कलम, चलती रहे कलम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम। कदम मिलाकर नर नारी सब और बढ़े, ज्ञान और विज्ञान नए सोपान चढ़े। कदम मिलाकर नर नारी सब और बढ़े, ज्ञान और विज्ञान नए सोपान चढ़े। देना है संदेश यही हमको हरदम, यही हमको हरदम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले हम, आशाओं की किरण जगाने वाले हम, जन जन से संपर्क बढ़ाने वाले।
माँ सरस्वती को नमन और आप सभी को दशहरे की बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं। On behalf of the Public Relations Society of India, I, Anshu Mahajan, welcome all of you. I welcome all the dignitaries, officials from the world of mass communications and journalism. I also warmly welcome the PRSI officials, the public relations academicians, and students from across the country who have been a vital part of this journey on virtual platform. This orientation program was brought to you by the Public Relations Society of India, or PRSI as it is famously called. PRSI is the national organization of India's public relations and communications professionals. A 63-year-old professional body, PRSI proudly draws membership from private and public sectors, the government, NGOs, PR consultants, as well as from the world of advertising, mass communication, and academia. In the last 14 days, you have been benefited by the deliberations of renowned academicians. Today, I am pleased to present to you Dr. Neha Jingala, who is presently working as an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism at the Delhi College of Arts and Commerce in the University of Delhi. She has an extensive academic experience of more than a decade and has worked with Doordarshan, various national dailies, and many reputed organizations of similar stature. After the presentation by Dr. Neha Jingala, I will request you all to please stay on with us. We will have a short valedictory ceremony for this entire virtual journey. Kindly be with us. May I now present to you Dr. Neha Jingala, who will talk about the interesting subject of photography.
Hello everyone, let's discuss about the basics of digital photography with me, Dr. Neha Jingala. Just a couple of years ago, a professional would have chosen from the vast array of film camera types, be it the single lens reflex camera, twin lens reflex camera, rangefinder, and view camera to name a few when selecting the tools of his or her trade. Now, with the advent of digital technology and digital software, the serious photographer can, for the most part, rely on a digital single lens reflex camera or DSLR. A DSLR is an incredibly advanced and refined tool that still offers the all-important ability, as in film version cameras, to view your subject through the same lens that records the image onto your sensor. This is achieved via a mirror and a pentaprism, so that what you see is what you get. It is hard to imagine that every time you press the shutter to take a picture, a mirror between the rear of the lens and the image sensor flips out of the way. The camera shutter opens and the sensor is exposed for the required time. Meanwhile, the camera's microprocessor is writing the multitude of information the image sensor has actually recorded to the camera's memory card. This is incredible in itself. Now consider how incredible are the cameras used by sports and press photographers, which manage this at 8 frames per second. For all intents and purposes, there are two types of DSLR cameras. The first is a traditional looking camera, roughly based on the 35mm film camera bodies that preceded it. Photographers who would normally use both medium and large format professional cameras are discovering that in some instances, the modern high-end DSLR provides superior image quality when compared to the scan that was possible from their film. The format of a camera refers to the size of the negative of film cameras and the size of the image sensor in the digital cameras. Large format refers to cameras with a 4" by 5" negative and larger, whereas medium refers to cameras between 35mm and large format. Previous users of these high-end film compacts and rangefinder cameras are also gravitating toward the more advanced functionality and image quality provided by the DSLR. The second type of DSLR is based on the medium format SLR. Some models consist merely of a digital back on a medium format film system camera, whereas There are a few manufacturers which are producing large DSLRs using the largest CCDs, that is, charge coupled device. These cameras tend to be used for pictures that require the highest image resolution, such as landscape and still life. Once you have your new camera, you should keep in mind that the camera essentially houses a miniature computer. Keep your camera software, firmware up to date. The camera manufacturers continuously tune and fine-tune the firmware that runs your camera. Updates can be downloaded from the support section of the manufacturer's website, and the instructions to install them into your camera will be found in your instruction manual. Copying the firmware file to a memory card normally does this. Once the memory card is in your camera, use the camera's menu to upload the firmware to your camera. As soon as you buy your camera, check to make sure that you have the latest firmware. Bear in mind that this is new technology that is continuously evolving and improving. Just as it with computers, as soon as you buy a new model and are familiar with using it, a newer one would be available in the market. Now let's talk about sensors. The image sensor in a digital camera replaces the film. There are two main types of sensors used in DSLR cameras. They are CMOS and CCD. CMOS stands for complementary metal oxide semiconductor. CCD stands for charge coupled device. When professional photographers are choosing and purchasing a camera system, they like to shoot some comparison test shots with the camera they're considering for buying. Where possible, emulate this practice. Check the files in the image editing software on your computer. Make sure both cameras are tested with all in-camera sharpening turned off to allow for a fair comparison. A camera technician at your local store can show you how you do this. Some sensor camera combinations are particularly good for low light when using a sensor sensitivity of 400 ISO or higher, while others are fantastic in full natural light and terrible when used with a high ISO sensor sensitivity. Check the amount of noise or grain at a higher ISO. Do your research well and choose a suitable sensor for the type of photography you're most interested in. Now the question arises, what type of lens do I need? Now that you have bought your new DSLR camera and are starting to come to terms with its operation, you might well be thinking about buying another lens. When you purchase the camera, it likely came with a standard lens or with a zoom lens. But if you feel like you need something different, what do you look for? There are many types of lenses available in the market. And to know which lens you should buy, you need to know what you want to photograph with it. Lenses come in all shapes and sizes, and they all have specific characteristics. Now let's just talk about these three basic types of lenses. Number 1, wide angle. Number 2, standard. Number 3, telephoto. A lens particularly belongs to a category based on its focal length. 50 mm is the traditional focal length for a standard lens. Less than 50 mm is considered a wide angle lens. Greater than 50 mm is considered to be a telephoto lens. And anything that is beyond 300 mm are known as super telephoto. Now let's just talk about the standard lens. The standard lens, which is of 50 mm focal length, gives an angle of view of between 45 and 55 degree, which is approximately the same as that of your human eye. Because of this, it produces an image with a natural look. It photographs things in a manner that is as near as possible to the way we would see the same subject. Now, because these lenses photograph subjects in the same way as we see things, they produce pictures that tend to look normal and thus have a wide application as a general purpose lens. Now, talking about the wide angle lens. With so many wide angle lenses available ranging in focal length from 8 mm to 35 mm, the choice is really huge and can be quite confusing. Basically, the wider the lens, the more specialized its use becomes. Super wide lenses can distort the image and have a limited, if valuable, use. I would suggest that either a 24 mm or a 28 mm lens, the more common type of wide angle, would be a good choice to purchase as a starter lens. The 35 mm wide angle lens is often used as a standard lens because although the focal length is slightly less than the 55 mm of the standard lens, the difference is not huge. It can give the photographer the advantage of extra depth of field, a real benefit for news photographers who shoot where space is often limited and for whom the more of the pictures in focus are definitely the better. Because if the angle of view of the wide angle lens is much greater than that of the telephoto or your standard lens, it's obviously the lens to use where there's limited space or the subject is large. Landscape photography is another area where wide angle lenses are very useful. Using a wide angle offers the ability to get close to your main subject to make it more prominent in the frame while keeping as much of the background in focus as you want. Talking about the telephoto lenses, we all know that a long telephoto lens can bring the subject right into the heart of the picture. Objects that appear to be miles away when shot with the standard lens appear to be only feet in front of the photographer when shot with the telephoto lens. This is why all the photographers at cricket match, football match use telephoto lenses to capture the action. Telephoto lenses have many more uses than just sports photography. The narrow angle of acceptance and the extra magnification allow the photographer to foreshorten the distance between himself, herself, and the point of interest of the picture. So the lens allows you to capture a small portion of the scene so that your subject is not lost. This effect makes telephoto lenses particularly suited to landscape photography when you are trying to isolate details in a rather large area. The longer focal length of telephoto lens means that it has much less depth of field than a wide angle or even talking about a standard lens. This effect can be used to drop out or blur backgrounds to create a sharp, clear subject without the confusion of a busy background. You must take this factor into consideration while using a telephoto to shoot landscape pictures, where it's often best to have as much of the picture in focus as possible. This often requires long shutter speeds and definitely small aperture to create greater depth of field. A tripod will be necessary to hold the camera perfectly still. A short telephoto lens that is of 90 mm focal length, 110 mm focal length or 135 mm focal length is ideal for portraiture. It allows the photographers to maintain a comfortable distance from the subject while still allowing use of the limited depth of field to avoid confusing background. Now let's just talk about the zoom lens or fixed focal length. As zoom lenses have become better, their popularity has grown a lot. A few years ago, a zoom lens could not match the quality of a fixed focal length lens and was seen as a cheaper alternative to buying a number of fixed focal length lenses. This situation particularly has rapidly changed, and some of the sharpest and fastest lenses are now available as zoom lenses. The zoom lens allows the photographer to carry less equipment since a single zoom lens will often replace 2 or even 3 normal lenses. A top quality zoom lens is expensive and will often cost the equivalent of the 2 or 3 fixed focal length lenses it replaces. So if you have choice between a constant aperture zoom lens versus a variable aperture zoom lens, choose the constant one. And the reason is simple. Your aperture remains the same as you zoom. So your exposure can remain the same. With the variable zoom lens, the aperture can close down as much as 1 f-stop. For example, if you zoom from 28 mm to 135 mm and you started with f3.5, you may end up with f5.6. The way to combat this is to stop down anyway so you are not affected. Or better yet, spend more money for a constant aperture zoom lens. Now let's just talk about macro lenses. So if you have a desire to photograph insects, close-up of flowers or any other small objects, then the macro lens might be what you need. Usually available in 35 mm, 50 or 60 mm or 100 or 105 mm focal length. These lenses are similar to normal lenses in that they can focus to infinity, but they are designed to focus at extremely short distances. They are used for extreme close-up photography. Coins, stamps or any other small objects are ideal subjects for a macro lens, and because it can focus at a distance as well, the macro lens can also be used as standard lens. The addition of extension rings that fit between the camera and the lens can make this lens capable of even more extreme close-up photography. Finally, there are macro zoom lenses in this category that can produce an image of an object at a 1:3 ratio. Sometimes these lenses can even give life-size reproduction on the film or on the sensor. Let's talk about the fisheye lenses. It's called a fisheye lens because it produces images that look like a fish's eye. This lens is extremely wide angle. It can produce an angle of view of 180 degrees and either a circular or a full frame image that is very distorted at the edges. Because this is the only type of image it can produce, it is obviously limited in use. Now talking about the shift lenses, they are expensive, but if you like photographing tall buildings, you will find a use for this particular type of lens. Using a standard lens, the camera has to be tilted backward to fit the top of the building into the frame. This produces an image in which the building appears to be falling backward, and all the vertical lines coverage at the top of the picture, a consequence of the film or image sensor plane not being kept parallel to the subject. A shift lens basically allows the camera to remain straight and parallel to the building and uses moving front lens elements to enable the entire building to be in the frame. You do this by sliding up the front portion of the lens to include the top of the building so you don't have to point the camera up. The use of a shift lens will stop the vertical lines from coming together while still giving the impression of looking up at the building. Such kind of lenses have been used by different photographers lately to create interesting images. The tilt feature allows photographers to control sharpness and blur in unexpected ways. Now let's just discuss about how to expose your pictures properly. First, I will define the 3 basic photographic terms you will need to know. Then we can learn in greater detail about each one. Number 1, it's exposure. Now when talking about exposure, it is the amount of light controlled by aperture and shutter speed that reaches the image sensor. Talking about the f-stops, f-stops are the measure of the size of the opening or aperture in the lens. Remember, the larger the f-stop number, the smaller the aperture. And the smaller the f-stop number, the larger the aperture and the more light the lens will get through to the image sensor. Third, talking about the shutter speed, it is the measure of the duration or length of the time that the shutter stays open. The longer the shutter stays open, the more light will be allowed to reach the image sensor. Faster shutter speed frees the action and often require more light, and a larger aperture on the other hand, which is a small f-stop number. Slower shutter speeds enable pictures to be taken in lower light with a smaller aperture, that is larger f-stop number. Before we can achieve the correct exposure, it is important to know what a correctly exposed image looks like. A correctly exposed digital picture is a file that shows a full range of tones from deep shadows to bright highlights with detail across the entire image. You should see some detail in the dark shadow areas while at the same time retaining detail in the brighter highlight areas as well. Providing you get this, you can decide afterwards whether you actually need the full tonal range to appear when you print the image. If you don't ensure that you have the full tonal range from the start, there is little you can do about it later. This last point is more crucial when shooting in JPEG format. When shooting in RAW mode, getting the right exposure is a more forgiving process than it is when you shoot color negative film, because you can correct the color in your computer later. Now, how to control the light? So, to register a fully toned image on your digital camera sensor, you must allow the correct amount of light to reach the digital sensor. The three factors that control the path of light are sensor sensitivity, that is ISO. Second, it's shutter speed. Third, it's aperture. So talking about ISO, that is also referred as the sensor sensitivity. The digital era has brought us light years forward because we can now see the result of our setting instantly. Just as with film cameras, the DSLR takes into account the brightness of the subject, the contrast, the color of the picture, and the area focused. When set for automatic exposure, the camera calculates all this and much more instantly. If you are a newcomer to photography, there are many other different aspects that have to be considered before you take each picture. How do I frame the picture? Is it in focus? What is the background like? Until all these elements start to become second nature, it's wise to leave your camera on auto exposure. This will give you one less thing to worry about while you concentrate on all the others. Then slowly, as you become more technical proficient and have learned to hold the camera the right way, you start to appreciate the small adjustments that are possible on your camera to perfect exposure. On most DSLRs, the high-end compact digital cameras, you have the option of overriding your automatic exposure and setting the exposure manually. This is where we begin to play with the camera settings. We will learn not only to expose correctly, but to overexpose and underexpose deliberately. Film photography requires you to change films if you want to change the ISO setting, wherein when you talk about digital photography, it allows you to shoot a group of pictures or even a single picture at one ISO setting, then change the ISO on the same memory card and keep shooting. You can change the ISO as often as you like. Now talking about the shutter speeds. So there are some basic tips about shutter speeds to begin. Now if you want to capture a racing car or someone riding a bicycle, start with 1/1000th second of your shutter speed. For everyday pictures such as portraits and normal views, use shutter speed of 1/60th second of shutter speed to probably 1/250th second of shutter speed. And if the light is like really bad, try not to go below 1/60th second. If you must, hold your camera very still and don't expect to freeze any action. Now talking about aperture, which is also called as f-stop. Some of the basic tips are, as a general rule, f5.6 gives a little bit of depth of field provided the lens focal length isn't too long and is still wide enough to enable high shutter speeds. If it is really dark, don't be afraid to open your aperture to its maximum aperture, for example f2. If you need lots of depth of field or you want to slow the shutter speed, stop down to f11 when using a short lens, or use f16. If your picture looks a little bit lighter or darker, then it should take another, having adjusted the exposure. You can make your image lighter by increasing your exposure or darker by decreasing it. If you find that your images consistently look better by underexposing by one stop or by overexposing by half a stop, then use the exposure compensation setting to build this factor into the camera's light metering. This facility enables you to under or overexpose by up to 3 f-stops or full shutter speeds. This is normally indicated on your camera by a scale from +3 to -3, which either half or third stop increments. Once you set it, the camera will usually maintain the adjustment until you change it. Most professional photographers I know use the exposure compensation feature to fine-tune the meter of their cameras. Take lots of different versions of each pictures. When you have time and the subject permits, vary your exposure so you don't miss an important shot. Check the images on your computer screen and delete all the bad ones before you show anyone your work. On most digital cameras, you'll find a variety of exposure modes, typically referred to as aperture priority, that is AE or AV, shutter priority, that is AE or TV, then program AE, P, and manual, that is referred to as M. The aperture priority mode enables you to set the f-stop, that is the aperture, and the camera will then adjust the shutter speed to give the correct exposure. This mode is particularly useful in low light condition where you want to set the brightest, widest f-stop in order to get the highest shutter speed and the minimum amount of movement. If more depth of field is needed, you can use a small f-stop to get as much of your picture in focus as possible. Using the shutter priority mode, you can set the shutter speed and the camera selects the f-stop aperture to give the correct exposure. This can be especially used when you're shooting action pictures and you want to freeze the motion by setting a higher shutter speed. By the same token, if you were photographing a waterfall and you wanted to blur the water, you could set a slower shutter speed and the aperture would adjust accordingly. It goes without saying that both modes assume you have enough light to expose your pictures within the range of shutter speeds and apertures you're using. The setting of program leaves all the decision making to the camera. The camera sets a combination of shutter speed and aperture, so you don't have to think about exposure at all. In some cameras, this may be set up as subject programs such as portrait, sports, or landscape. Be careful though, if there's not enough or too much light to achieve the effect you're after, your camera won't be able to work miracles. Even in this setting, check the LCD to make sure that you are getting the images you actually want. And remember that you can still use auto exposure compensation to override the camera's decision. Talking about the manual mode, it basically enables you to manually set the shutter speed and the aperture independently of each other, referring either to the camera's built-in meter or to a handheld meter. Professionals tend to use manual exposure and handheld light meters. This allows them to take multiple meter readings in This allows them to take multiple meter readings in various points of the subject frame. In this method, the photographer has total control over the pictorial efforts that various shutter speed and aperture combinations can actually achieve. When film was dominant, this method tended to be the exclusive realm of the professional or the advanced amateur. Today, the immediate feedback of digital photography allows you to shoot a test frame, have a look, make a slight adjustment, have another little look, and get your exposure right. Most advanced DSLR cameras have an auto bracket setting. This clever little feature sets the camera to take 3 pictures automatically in rapid succession, one at the correct exposure, one overexposed, and one underexposed. I find this very useful when working quickly because I know it will give me a choice of exposure after the fact. By setting the camera to shoot one picture at the correct exposure as the camera sees it and 2 frames, perhaps one f-stop either side, I'll always end up with one frame that I consider to be the perfect exposure. You can change the increments to the brackets so that they are 1/3, half, or 2/3 stop to either side of the correct exposure depending on the camera model. On most cameras, this facility works on all the automatic settings and in manual mode. Now, talking about the different metering meters, metering patterns. Most advanced DSLR cameras, along with the automatic exposure modes, have some additional settings that can affect your exposure. The default setting on most DSLR camera and point-and-shoot cameras is multi-segment metering. This method of metering divides the image into a number of smaller areas in which the microprocessors of the camera meter the light. The camera then combines these readings with the aperture and shutter speed and produces a near perfect result in almost all the cases. I would suggest you leave your camera set on matrix evaluated metering and switch temporarily to spot metering when the situation calls for it. Talking about spot metering, it is a really good setting when shooting manually. The reading is taken from a very small section in the center of the frame, sometimes as little as 1% of the total image. This is very useful, for instance, if you are sitting in a separate light from the person you wish to photograph. See, you are sitting outside a cafe in the shade of an umbrella. You see your friend has arrived and she's standing in a shaft of sunlight. In order to expose a picture of her correctly, use spot metering. You need to set the camera to expose for the sunlight around her, not the shade around you. Now, talking about the second type of metering, it's the center weighted metering. It is more biased towards the center of the frame. Less attention is actually paid to the corners and edges. Personally, I don't have a use for this function except on some cameras in which automatic flash is more reliable on this setting. Other photographers like it because this kind of metering tends to underexpose the photograph, which work well with slide film once and likewise digital. As always, experiment to find the best combination of settings for your particular camera. Now, talking about the third metering pattern, it's the handheld meter. This is an absolute exotic accessory for the digital photographer and is really only necessary for a professional working with additional lighting or strobes. A handheld meter today is often a combination of an exposure meter and a flash meter and is generally used as an incident light meter. This means that the meter measures the light falling on the subject rather than the light reflected off the subject, the way your camera does its metering. This highly accurate and precise instrument is used by holding the meter in front of the subject, This highly accurate and precise instrument is used by holding the meter in front of the subject with its white dome pointing towards your camera. You take the reading and transfer these settings to your camera while your camera is set in the manual mode. The system does not take into account the color or density of the subject and produces settings suitable for a mid-toned average subject. The main use for this meter in the digital world is when using supplementary strobes or flashes. It has the ability to measure the brightness intensity of a non-dedicated studio flash, a capability that is not found in the meter in the camera. This tool is essential when setting up complicated shots with studio type lighting. Now let's just understand about histograms. As you have heard before, one of the best things about digital camera is the ability to review your images on the back of your camera. When I harp on about checking the exposure on your LCD screen, sometimes I hear this. Now let's just talk about histograms. As you have heard before, one of the best things about digital camera is the ability to review your images on the back of your camera. Some of the photographers think a histogram is some sort of family tree. It is in fact a fairly simple bar chart. The chart illustrates how the pixels in an image are distributed by graphing the number of pixels at each color intensity level. This shows you whether the image contains enough detail in the shadows, shown on the left side of the histogram, midtones, which is shown in the middle, and highlights, that is shown on the right hand side, to create a good overall exposure. As you get used to viewing histograms, you will find them a great tool for checking and double checking your photographs, especially in adverse lighting conditions. Knowing what sort of histogram a well exposed image produces eliminates the chances of being fooled by an LCD screen that is not set to correct the brightness. If the histogram looks alright, it does not matter whether the image looks light or dark on the screen. The truth is in the histogram. A good exercise is to take some pictures of a subject with a full range of colors and tones. Set your camera to manual exposure and expose one frame as the meter suggests. Then take the same picture in a range of frames at half or 1/3 stop increments, from 3 stops under to 3 stops over. Look at the histograms of these pictures to learn how to read and understand them, taking into account how the chart varies with under and over exposure. Very, very roughly speaking, and I may get criticized for simplifying to this degree, you're looking very, very roughly speaking. Repeat. Very, very roughly speaking, and I may get criticized for simplifying to this degree. You're looking for a mountain range in your histogram window that starts at one edge, finishes at the other edge, and reaches towards the top of the histogram frame. Obviously, since every picture has different content, your mountain ranges will definitely vary. Now, talking about autofocus. Most beginning photographers leave their autofocus function on the factory default setting of on all the time, like most of the other settings on their digital cameras. To start with, and as you learn, this is just where you should leave this setting. Only when you have mastered the other functions and facilities of your camera, you should begin to tinker with this option. Like most settings on your DSLR, autofocus should really be referred to as automated rather than automatic. There are many options within the menus of your cameras to fine-tune the focusing. I can't stress enough the importance of gradually learning how to use these and all the functions of your camera as you progress. Using this automated as opposed to manual mode does not in any way mean that you're taking the easy option. If anything, you're proving that you are a master of technology and that all that hard-earned cash spent on your new advanced digital camera has not been wasted. Perhaps the first autofocus function found on high-end cameras that you should learn to use right from the start is commonly known as one-shot or single servo. Use this in cases where you want to compose your pictures when the subject is off-center. In your viewfinder, there will be either crosshairs or AF, that is autofocus, pointing to signify the point on which the camera focuses. Point your cameras directly at the subject so that the AF point is aimed at the part of your picture that you wish to be the primary point of focus. By using this one-shot single servo mode, the autofocus is activated as you initially depress the shutter. It will then It will then lock into place as the camera focuses on the point you have chosen. Holding down the button halfway to hold the focus, you may then recompose your pictures perfectly, allowing better composition. Be aware of this feature that it is totally unsuitable for moving animals. Repeat, be aware this feature is totally unsuitable for moving subjects because once looked in, repeat, be aware this feature is totally unsuitable for moving subjects because once locked in, the focus does not move until you press the shutter. Every picture you shoot will of course need refocusing. There are some scenes that are unreliable in the autofocus function, such as snowy scenes, wide open blue skies, very low lighting conditions. When the camera is unable to focus on any point against the snow or blue sky, for example, set the one-shot function, lock the focus on something a similar distance from the primary subject, and then recompose your picture. Another function which is in use in some way similar to one-shot is commonly known as back button focusing. In this mode, you enable one of the functions buttons on the back of your DSLR to activate the focusing. So before you shoot, and in fact while you shoot, you can enable and disable the focusing at will. On some advanced DSLRs, when you combine this with the ability to manually select one of the many focal points, you're using the camera's autofocus system to its full potential. Once you've started to master your camera, there are many more settings that you can learn to use within autofocus menus. These vary a lot from manufacturer to manufacturer and taking into account many different factors, sometimes even the type of picture and color of the intended photograph. So you'll need to refer to your camera instruction manual. Now talking about another important thing in the field of photography is depth of field. Depth of field is the distance between the nearest and the farthest object in an image judged to be in acceptable focus. The focal length and aperture of the lens you are using and your focus distance govern your depth of field. The longer the focal length, the less the depth of field. And vice versa. The shorter the focal length, the more the depth of field. The smaller the aperture, the greater the depth of field, other things being equal. In layman's terms, telephoto lenses have less depth of field than wide-angle lenses, and a more powerful telephoto lens gives less depth of field. It also follows that extremely wide-angle lenses provide the most depth of field. When you see a beautiful landscape photograph hanging on a wall in a gallery, it was very likely shot on a very small aperture to get as much depth of field as possible. Even on a sunny day, using the smallest aperture may require a rather long shutter speed and may therefore require the use of tripod. This can create a dilemma. For instance, you would ideally want to use a higher shutter speed for shooting action photographs. Yet the subject is traveling at speed, so a small aperture would give you more of the subject in focus, thus making it easier to get the picture sharp. Some folks would just use a higher sensitivity for their sensor, thus enabling higher shutter speed and lower apertures. But this comes at a price, and perhaps the most expensive price when it comes to photography, the all-important quality of the image. The sad fact is that as you increase the sensitivity of your sensor, the image quality definitely may decrease. So now it's decision time. You can't have everything, so you have to choose what is most important to you, right? So let's just talk about composition. Unfortunately, when it comes to framing your pictures, there is no auto composition button to come to your rescue. So this is one skill that you really will have to master. Photography is about seeing something pictorial and recording it in an interesting and graphic way. If the subject doesn't have the content to begin with, you cannot mysteriously add it. If the colors and shapes of the subject don't complement each other, guidelines will not help you. They are there to help you make the most of what you see and photograph. Unless you are constantly looking and thinking, you will not get great pictures. To compose your pictures properly in very simple terms is to produce a pleasing picture. This is easily achieved in most cases. Sometimes it may be as simple as turning the camera vertically or take the picture as opposed to more commonly used landscape or horizontal format. The important thing is to really think about your picture and not get too bogged down in technical details. This may sound hypocritical as the bulk of the book deals with the technical aspect of digital photography, but it is essential to understand the technical side is there to enable you to express your creativity. Until and unless you fully grasp the basics of composition, no matter how technically advanced you become, your pictures will always be lacking. To start with, be bold and fill the viewfinder with your subject. If the subject is predominantly upright, shoot the picture vertically. If your subject lends itself to a horizontal picture, shoot it in the landscape mode. When you review your pictures at the end of the day, you will be surprised to find that subjects are much smaller in the frame than you expected. You must make sure that when you look through the viewfinder, you are looking at everything that is in the viewfinder. Take into account what's around your subject and ask yourself if it contributes to the picture you are trying to make. One of the advantages of the compact digital camera, which is lacking on nearly all DSLRs, is the ability to use the LCD screen on the rear of your camera as a viewfinder. I find that people tend to frame their picture far better when using the LCD because they tend to look at the whole picture. As you start to shoot more pictures and you become more accustomed to filling the frame, start making use of different types of lenses. Don't be afraid to shoot, for example, an extreme close-up of your friend, a flower, or anything for that matter. When you shoot close-up portraits, try experimenting with your framing. Your subject does not always have to be in the center of the frame looking directly at the camera. Perhaps when photographing, say, your friend, it may be more pleasing to compose a picture with her on the left or right looking into the center of the picture. Now that you are beginning to frame your portraits, you have started to compose your pictures well. Since the time of Leonardo da Vinci, budding artists have had the rule of thirds drummed into them at art school. I personally find rules extremely boring. Look through your viewfinder and mentally divide the screen into 3 horizontal and 3 vertical sections like a tic-tac-toe grid. The points where the lines intersect are the places that your eyes naturally seek out when looking at a photograph. It's logical, therefore, that you should try to position your subject near one of these 4 focal points. When photographing a landscape, it's also good compositional practice to place the horizon or skyline on one of these imaginary lines. At this point, we must also mention that it is important to keep your horizon straight. Failing to do so is the most common mistake when starting out. It's a real disappointment to see a photograph in which skylines run downhill. Changing the angle from which you take a picture can hugely transform it. For small subjects such as pets and babies, try to get down on their level. Lie down and look up at a 1-year-old baby for a far more interesting picture. A tight portrait of your dog asleep on the rug is far better photograph if you're lying down on the same level. Choosing a dynamic viewpoint can help your photography and accentuate your pictures. Don't be afraid to be radical and stand directly above the sleeping dog. This may or may not give a more interesting viewpoint. The point is to keep experimenting and looking to find the most dynamic picture. A good tip for these DSLRs is to hold the camera on the floor or above your head to gain a more dramatic viewpoint and view the image using your LCD to control your composition. This way you can sometimes achieve a viewpoint that wouldn't have been possible if you had to compose a picture through a normal viewfinder. The less agile you are, the more useful this can be. If your frame contains visible or long continuous lines such as roads, river, fences, buildings, etc., take advantages of these lines when composing your image to lead your eyes into the main subject of the picture. This works particularly well when the lines originate from the bottom corners of your photographs. Winding road, for example, leads to the old temple you're photographing. This works particularly well when the line originates from the bottom corners of your photographs. One last word on color in your composition. It's up to you as the photographer to see and appreciate colors and the aesthetics of different combinations. Color can give a warm or cold feeling to a picture, reflecting your preconceived views on color. A winter scene can be enhanced by the use of blue in the picture to give that chilly feeling, for example, or a red beach umbrella on golden sand can evoke the feeling of warmth. Although it's not usually possible to add colors to your photographs, be aware of color as you're looking to make that great and beautiful picture. Thank you.
At the heart of PRSI lies its core mission to strengthen the public relations and communication profession in the country. At the same time, it has always been on the forefront to build public opinion on various issues of national and social importance. COVID has impacted the entire world in last 2 years. But as part of PRSI, we feel happy to be a part of an institution which has been active in all its professional and academic activities throughout the pandemic times and has striven to boost COVID awareness and served humanity. As part of its commitment to the world of academia, PRSI has organized this orientation program as a free platform for knowledge sharing. I take this opportunity to welcome our chief guest, former Union Education Minister, Dr. Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank ji. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you in our midst, sir. I also welcome warmly our guest of honor, Mr. Richard A. Lenning, past President, International Public Relations Association and Chairman, World Innovation and Change Management Institute. A very warm welcome indeed to Dr. Ajit Pathak, the National President of PRSI. I also warmly welcome the Executive and National Council members of PRSI and the respected professors of PR and Mass Communication who have been a source of energy throughout this event. And a special note of welcome to the vibrant students of Mass Communications to whom this event is dedicated. A warm welcome to one and all. I welcome you all on behalf of the Public Relations Society of India. Let us begin this valedictory program with an invocation presentation by Ms. Shreya Sethi, who is a student of the Vivekanand School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Delhi.
गौरी शिव शंकर परमसुतं तं कार्तिकानुजं तं मुनिवल्लभं तं गणपति जय जय विघ्नेश्वरं तं गौरी शिव शंकर परमसुतं तं कार्तिकानुजं तं मुनिवल्लभं तं पाशाङ्कुशहस्तं पीताम्बरं तं स्मराम्यहं तं गजाननं तं लम्बोदरं तं मोदकप्रियं तं पाशाङ्कुशहस्तं पीताम्बरं तं स्मराम्यहं तं गजाननं तं दिदितयुं दिदितयुं ततैता दिदितयुं दिदितयुं ततैता दित्तै तकदित्तै तकदिं दिं 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 दित्तै 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 तक्कुंतर्रि कुक्कुंतर्रि तक्कुंतर्रि जं जं तक्कु तक्कुक्कु तक्कुक्कुंतर्रि तित्तित्तै तक्कुंतर्रि कुक्कुंतर्रि तक्कुंतर्रि जं जं तक्कु तक्कुक्कु तक्कुक्कुंतर्रि दित्तित्तै तक्कुंतर्रि कुक्कुंतर्रि तक्कुंतर्रि जं जं तक्कु तक्कुक्कु तक्कुक्कुंतर्रि दित्तित्तै तक्कुंतर्रि कुक्कुंतर्रि तक्कुंतर्रि जं जं तक्कु तक्कुक्कु तक्कुक्कुंतर्रि दित्तित्तै तक्कुंतर्रि कुक्कुंतर्रि तक्कुंतर्रि जं जं तक्कु तक्कुक्कु तक्कुक्कुंतर्रि दित्तित्तै तक्कुंतर्रि कुक्कुंतर्रि तक्कुंतर्रि जं जं तक्कु तक्कुक्कु तक्कुक्कुंतर्रि दित्तित्तै गणपति जय जय विघ्नेश्वरं तं 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 विघ्नेश्वरं तं गणपति जय जय.
Through this orientation program, the PRSI is actually conveying its blessings and good wishes to the entire student community for a vibrant future. To wish them success, all the 4 national vice presidents of PRSI offered prayers in temples.
PRSI ईस्टर्न जोन। मैं आज माँ कामाख्या देवी के मंदिर में आई हूँ। सभी स्टूडेंट्स और जितने पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं, आप सभी के लिए मैं आशीर्वाद मांगने माँ से आशीर्वाद लेने आई हूँ। अभी मैं पूरा मंदिर परिक्रमा किया और मैं आप लोगों के लिए यह आशीर्वाद मांग के मैं भेज रही हूँ। स्वीकार कीजिएगा। नमस्कार।
Morning everybody. Today I am at near the temple of Lord Sri Varaha Lakshmi Narasimha Swami Simhacham at Visakhapatnam. Specifically I came to the temple to pray for all the students and faculty members of the PR and mass communication people, those who participated all these 15 days for the orientation programs. I pray God like Varaha Lakshmi Narasimha Swami and all to bless His blessings to the PRSA family, all PR and media communication students, faculty members, and all the people who have participated all these 15 days. God bless you all. Good day. Sukhi Bhava. Sukhi Bhava.
Namaskar. I am Unmesh Dikshit, National Vice President West, PRSI. I am right now at Sola Bhagavat Vidyapith Temple, Ahmedabad. From this temple, I offer my humble prayers to all the mass media communication and journalism students for their successful career. May you all achieve your desired dreams and work hard for your profession and your career. Wish you all good luck. Thank you.
बाबा भोलेनाथ की नगरी, विश्व की सबसे प्राचीन नगरी काशी, अनित्य काशी, अविनाशी काशी, एक जाह्नवी के तट पर उत्तर वाहिनी गंगा माँ आप सबको आशीर्वाद दे रही हैं कि आप अपने इस विख्यात वेबिनार में, जो कि जनसंपर्क एवं संचार से संबंधित है, उसके संपूर्णता पर अपने जीवन में अत्यंत सफलता अर्जित करें। आप सबका नरेंद्र मेहता, वाराणसी, जो कि पब्लिक रिलेशन सोसाइटी ऑफ इंडिया उत्तर प्रदेश वाराणसी का राष्ट्रीय उपाध्यक्ष है, आप सबको शुभकामनाएं देता है। धन्यवाद।
The PR and mass communication students have been greatly benefited in the last 15 days, where 15 eminent professors throughout the country blessed the students with their knowledge. Let us express our gratitude to them. And may I now invite Mr. Y. Babji, the Secretary General of PRSI, for a formal welcome address. Mr. Y. Babji.
Respected guests, good evening. Welcome to the valedictory session of All India Public Relations and Mass Communication Students Orientation Program. The series of lectures presented by the speakers gave the PR fraternity abundant inputs to update their knowledge. It benefited the young practitioners and student community a lot. We therefore gratefully acknowledge the services of speakers for having shared their knowledge in 15 sessions from 1st of October. Dr. Rajkumar Singh of SMS Varanasi spoke on entrepreneurship and career options in mass communication. Dr. Kulvin Trehan of CGSIPU Delhi talked about innovations and creativity in marketing communication. Dr. Suresh Chandra Nayak of Amity University, Raipur, gave a presentation on public relations in digital era. Dr. Sonal Pandya of Gujarat University, Ahmedabad, spoke on cultural aspects of public relations. Dr. Charulata Singh of VSJMC New Delhi tracked the evolution of public relations and emerging trends. Dr. Tanushri Mukherjee of Amity University, Jaipur, expounded corporate identity and management strategies. Dr. Surabhi Dahiya of IIMC, New Delhi, dealt with media industry in India. Dr. Albina Abbas of AAFT University, Noida, discussed the topic New Media. Dr. Rashmi Verma of Central University, Ranchi, talked on news literacy and fact-checking. Dr. Anubhuti Yadav of IIMC New Delhi spoke on social media monitoring. Dr. Monisa Qadri of Islamic University, Srinagar, illustrated advertising appeals. Dr. Harsha Bhargavi of INPR Department of Telangana explained government information and public relations. Dr. Anshu Arora of Amity University, Noida, detailed the methods and methodology of research in public relations. Dr. Devvrat Singh of Central University, Ranchi, talked on the techniques of documentary production, and today Dr. Neha Jingala of Delhi University on the subject photography. PRSI is indebted to these guest speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, our national president, Dr. Ajit Pathakji, is blessed with a magic wand, and therefore he is able to create amazing programs to keep PR people together, active and jubilant. I take this opportunity to welcome the chief guest of the program, Dr. Ramesh Pokhriyalji, former Chief Minister of Uttarakhand and former Union Minister of HRD and Education. Known by his pen name Nishank, Ramesh ji is a friend and patron of Public Relations Society of India. I also welcome the guest of honor, Mr. Richard Linning, former president of International Public Relations Association. He is the chairman of World Innovation and Change Management Institute, Switzerland. I invite my colleagues, Sri Dilip Chauhan, Secretary Treasurer, and National Vice Presidents,
Sri Narendra Mehta, Srimati Anu Majumdar, Sri Unmesh Dikshit and Sri U.S. Sharma, leaders of regional chapters, members of the National Council and of the chapters, also teachers and students of PR and mass communication. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the valedictory session of All India PR and Mass Communication Students Orientation Program of Public Relations Society of India. Thank you.
It gives me great pleasure to invite the person who has not only been leading PRSI from the front during the times of this pandemic, but has actually been instrumental in taking a number of new initiatives to serve the profession and the nation. It's the one and only Dr. Ajit Pathak. May I now invite the National President of PRSI, who envisioned this orientation program for students and fine-tuned every single detail to perfection. Dr. Ajit Pathak has been the National President of PRSI for the past 17 years. He is a past Secretary of the Global Alliance of Public Relations and Communication Management and the past Board Member of International Public Relations Association. Dr. Pathak has developed very cordial relationships and tremendous networking with international PR institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you Dr. Ajit Pathak.
नमस्कार। बुराई पर अच्छाई की जीत का पर्व हम मनाएं, बुराई पर अच्छाई की जीत का पर्व हम मनाएं, आपको ढेर सारी दशहरे की शुभकामनाएं। Chief guest of today's function, ex-Union Education Minister Dr. Ramesh Pokhariyal Nishank ji, our guest of honor, Mr. Richard A. Linning, past President, International Public Relations Association and Chairman, World Innovation and Change Management Institute. National Vice Presidents of PRSI, Ms. Anu Majumdar, Mr. Narendra Mehta, Mr. Unmesh Dikshit, and Mr. U.S. Sharma. Secretary General, PRSI, Mr. Y. Babji, Mr. Dilip Chauhan, Secretary Treasurer, professors of various mass communication and public relations institutes who have been part of this golden journey for past 15 eventful days, young communicators of India, the bright students of mass communication and PR participating from various parts of the country and members of PRSI family. I welcome you all on behalf of Public Relations Society of India at the valedictory function of the first of its kind orientation program for the students, which we organized from 1st to 15th October for the benefit of students with the support of the eminent professors of the country. We have tried to provide academic inputs to the next generation, covering all the aspects of public relations and mass communication. Friends, in the pandemic-infected world, we have tried to bring in fresh fragrance of hope and positivity. We have committed ourselves to create awareness about the COVID precautions, and we have also tried to insulate the future of PR practitioners as well as the budding mass communication professionals. I'm happy that this orientation program has really served the purpose, and thousands of students as well as the professionals have gained tremendous knowledge out of this effort. With our humble commitment, we shall overcome this COVID crisis, and India will soon be on its fast pace of development. This promises a fertile ground and rich opportunities for Indian public relations to interpret the new India to the world and help derive benefits to the country by building bridges of trust. During the last 2 years, PRSI launched an All India Corona Awareness Drive, Vijay Bharat Abhiyan, promotion of new education policy, promotional scheme for research in public relations, making meaningful use of the virtual platform. PRSI also organized a very successful 42nd All India PR Conference and PRSI National Awards. In the same series, this orientation program has come up. I take this opportunity to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Ramesh Pokhariyal Nishank ji, to be with us today. His blessings will go a long way as he is a leader with a difference. When a writer and a poet governs the nation, it gives birth to the new education policy, a policy that nurtures values of the nation, empowers youth, and appreciates the need of school-going children, making different situation for the country to move forward with a new pace, new aspirations, new power. माननीय निशंक जी का सानिध्य पब्लिक रिलेशंस परिवार को सदैव से मिलता रहा है और ये हमारा सौभाग्य है कि हमने जितने भी मुख्य कार्यक्रम राष्ट्रीय धारा से जुड़कर के किए हैं उन सभी में हमें डॉक्टर निशंक जी का मार्गदर्शन मिलता रहा, चाहे गंगा और हिमालय के कार्यक्रम की बात हो, चाहे वन नेशन वन एजेंडा वन वॉइस की बात हो, सभी प्रयासों में डॉक्टर निशंक जी सदैव हमारे साथ रहे और हम आशा करते हैं कि उनका जो सानिध्य है हमें सदैव मिलता रहेगा। आपका बहुत बहुत आभार, बहुत बहुत स्वागत। It is our great privilege to have with us guest of honor, Mr. Richard A. Linning, past President, International Public Relations Association and Chairman, World Innovation and Change Management Institute. Richard is a dear friend and has been with us on PRSI platform on earlier occasions. I'm grateful to you, Richard, to join us today. I'm sure we shall have opportunities to work together under your new umbrella of innovation and change management. Friends, I have spent most of my working years in corporate environment, but I have always been connected with academics in one way or the other. I greatly respect the philosophy of industry-academia cooperation to promote the profession. This orientation program is yet another example of what the industry and the academia can do together. In last 15 days, we have become a family with the professors of mass communication while working together for this orientation program. I would like to appeal to all my young friends to take full advantage of this great learning opportunity. Let us all join hands to salute the efforts of all the mass communication teachers who have made this happen. Gratitude to all my executive committee members and National Council members for their sustained support to make it happen. I'm also grateful to Mr. Goyal, Rajiv Goyal, Chief General Manager, HPCL, for his support to the event, and Professor Charu Lata Singh, Dean Vivekanand School of Journalism and Mass Communication, for her support. She, along with her student team, made significant contribution to this particular event. I'm also grateful to Mr. Vikas Jha and Mr. Manish Huja for the technical support for this event. और चलते चलते आपसे मैं यही कहना चाहूंगा कि सोने की चिड़िया था भारत, सोने की चिड़िया था भारत, प्यारा देश ये अपना, विश्व प्रणेता फिर हम होंगे, सच होगा अपना ये सपना। कोई व्यापार करे कहीं भी, देखे भारत की ओर, महाशक्ति बनकर उभरेंगे, ऐसी होगी सुंदर वो भोर। रचनात्मकता और शोध का भरेंगे हम होंकारा, सतत बहेगी देश में अपने अन्वेषण की धारा। दुनिया को शून्य दिया था हमने, दुनिया को दिया हमने विज्ञान, तकनीकी होगी शीर्ष पर अपने, देखेंगे हमको चीन जापान। सूचना प्रौद्योगिकी के दिग्गज हैं अपने भारत के लोग, ये अपनी मेहनत और ताकत है नहीं मात्र संयोग, है नहीं मात्र संयोग। एक बार पुनः आप सभी को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं, बधाई और अभिनंदन।
We are all privileged to have in our midst, as our guest of honor for today's event, Mr. Richard A. Linning, the past President, International Public Relations Association, and the Chairman of World Innovation and Change Management Institute. Mr. Linning's career has taken him to every continent as a journalist, the public relations and public affairs consultant, issue advocate for governments, NGOs, companies, and trade associations. Mr. Linning was recently invited to be the founding president of the World Innovation and Change Management Institute based out of Geneva. As the illustrious president of the International Public Relations Association, Mr. Richard has led its restructuring to better reflect and link the language and cultural diversity of global practitioners. Mr. Richard was made an honorary fellow of the Senate of the University of Bucharest in recognition of his promotion of the free flow of information as a key component for the development of a democratic society. Ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome Mr. Richard A. Linning. And we would like to hear from you, sir.
Namaste. It's a great honor to be speaking to you today. I'd prefer to be with you, and I'd prefer to be with what I refer to as my Indian family, led by Dr. Pathak. But I can't. After this fortnight, you're embarking on a long journey of lifelong learning, of gaining knowledge and experience. And in my opinion, to be professional communicators, you actually need to be inquisitive, to be acquisitive of new information and new knowledge all the time. It's an important tool in your toolkit. It's natural to want to learn more, to acquire more knowledge. And in this context, it's interesting to recall the words of Donald Rumsfeld, the former American Secretary of State, of about a decade ago. He talked of knowledge as being of three different kinds. One or two people smiled at that, and you'll see why. The first was that he talked about the known and the known, that is, what we know. The second category was the known and the unknown, that is, what we know that we don't know. But what attracted the smile or two was when he talked about the unknown unknowns. In other words, what we don't yet know, what we don't know. He had a point. And in the Veda text, ignorance, what we don't know, is said to come in two forms. The first is the lack of knowledge about something that we yet to have to study or yet to have to learn. The other, which is potentially more perilous aspect, is not having a true or sufficient understanding of the things that we think that we know. Now, with the expansion of social media, we have access to a great deal of information, the things that we think that we know. But unfortunately, the social media is also full of disinformation and misinformation. So I come back to the fact that we need to have a true and sufficient understanding of what we think we know. Now, the difference between those two is trust. And as you embark upon your career, one of the biggest challenges that you're going to have, and it doesn't matter to me whether you're promoting a product, promoting a brand, information about a political party, government, or country. The thing that will be most important in that is trust. I've made many visits to India initially as president of the International Public Relations Association. Today I talk to you as president of the World Innovation and Change Management Institute. Innovation is necessary to address the problems that we share. But a bright idea and innovation is nothing without implementation. And the key to implementation is change. And the management of that change is one of the roles that we as communicators have. Nothing will happen without management of change. And the key to that is trust. Trust in the authority that is proposing the change, trust in the process of change, but more importantly, trust in the outcome of that change. Now, this may sound a big task to you, but I'll remind you of the words of Mahatma Gandhi. In a gentle way, you too can change the world. Now, this may seem a big mountain to be ahead of you. But if you stood at the foothills of the biggest mountain of all, as I have, Mount Everest, then you'll understand that the journey starts with the first step. This fortnight has been the first step for you. I wish you good luck on your journey and end with the wish, Dana Vad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lenning, for your encouraging words. The mass communication students from India are blessed to have your valuable message to them. भारत के यशस्वी प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी के सजग दूरदृष्टिपूर्ण नेतृत्व ने पूरे विश्व में भारत का मान बढ़ाया है। उनके सपनों को साकार करते हुए हमारे मुख्य अतिथि भारत के पूर्व शिक्षा व मानव संसाधन मंत्री डॉक्टर रमेश पोखरियाल निशंक जी ने नई शिक्षा नीति भारत को दी, जो देश के भविष्य के लिए मील का पत्थर साबित होगी। डॉक्टर निशंक has launched the Vijay Bharat Abhiyan and PRSI's association with the new education policy of India. He has been the main inspiration behind PRSI's initiative of organizing events on the mighty Himalayas and the holy Ganga. मैं बड़े ही गौरव और सम्मान के साथ हरिद्वार से सांसद, उत्तराखंड के पूर्व मुख्यमंत्री और भारत के पूर्व शिक्षा मंत्री, एक मूर्धन्य साहित्यकार डॉक्टर निशंक को आमंत्रित कर रही हूँ। कृपया आएं और हमें संबोधित करें। डॉक्टर निशंक।
नमस्कार। पीआर और मास कम्युनिकेशन के इस 15 दिवसीय प्रशिक्षण और पारस्परिक चर्चा के समापन के इस अवसर पर मैं आप सबका अभिनंदन करता हूं। पब्लिक रिलेशन सोसाइटी ऑफ इंडिया के सभी मेरे प्यारे साथियों और पब्लिक रिलेशंस ऑफ और मास कम्युनिकेशन से जुड़े शिक्षकगण, अतिथिगण और विद्यार्थियों, मैं समझता हूं कि जो विगत 15 दिनों में जिस तरीके से पूरे देश के कोने कोने से आए सब आप लोगों ने विभिन्न प्रकार के लोगों से मार्गदर्शन लिया, विभिन्न संस्थानों के प्रोफेसर्स, विशेषज्ञ और विषयों पर अपना नॉलेज रखने वाले वो लोग जिन्होंने अपने जीवन का बहुत महत्वपूर्ण समय इन दोनों विधाओं में अर्पित किया है, जिनका अच्छा ज्ञान है, अनुभव है, जिनका अपना विजन है, उन सब के द्वारा आपको जो मार्गदर्शन मिला है, मैं उन सभी प्राध्यापक गण और सभी उन जिन्होंने इस बीच इन 15 दिनों में अपने उद्बोधन से इस कार्यक्रम की गरिमा को बढ़ाया है, मैं उन सब का भी अभिनंदन करता हूं। मुझे लगता है कि मैं यदि PRSI के राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष डॉक्टर अजीत पाठक जी की इस पहल का यदि मैं उनको इसकी बधाई न दूं तो अधूरा रह जाएगा। मुझे उनकी, पाठक जी, आपकी और आपकी पूरी टीम को बहुत बधाई देनी है कि आप कहीं ना कहीं, मैं पीछे के समय से देख रहा हूं कि आप लोग सामाजिक गतिविधियों में राष्ट्र की नीतिगत और नैर्माणिक और रचनागत और विभिन्न प्रकार की सांस्कृतिक सामाजिक गतिविधियों में जिस तरीके से मिलकर के काम कर रहे हैं, एक वातावरण बना रहे हैं, तो मेरे लिए ये अच्छा कार्यक्रम ही न केवल मेरे लिए बल्कि देश के लिए ये एक सुखद विषय है। जिस गति से, जिस गतिशीलता से, जिस मन से, जिस मनोयोग से, जिस वजन के साथ समर्पित होकर के आपकी टीम इन चीज़ों को आगे बढ़ा रही है, मैं आप सबका अभिनंदन करता हूं। आप सबको मालूम है कि देश के प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी ने हमेशा कहा है कि हमारे देश जिसकी आबादी 135 करोड़ से भी अधिक है और जो दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा लोकतांत्रिक देश है, हमारे पास दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी युवा शक्ति है इस समय। और उस युवा शक्ति को किस तरीके से हम राष्ट्र के निर्माण में जुटाएं और राष्ट्र के निर्माण की उस नींव को मजबूत करके जो विश्व गुरु भारत है, जिससे सभी क्षेत्र में चाहे शोध हो, अनुसंधान हो, ज्ञान हो, विज्ञान हो, अनुसंधान हो, आचार हो, व्यवहार हो, संस्कार हो, जीवन मूल्य हो, हर दिशा में जिसने पराकाष्ठा को छुआ है और जो देश हमेशा से ही पूरे विश्व के लिए एक अनुकरणीय रहा है हर दिशा में, वो विश्व गुरु भारत फिर स्थापित करना है। और वो स्वर्णिम भारत, जो 21वीं सदी का स्वर्णिम भारत, जिसकी कल्पना, जिसकी संकल्पना मेरे देश के प्रधानमंत्री ने की है, उसको क्रियान्वयन करने की दिशा में अभी हमने जो नई शिक्षा नीति बनाई है वो बहुत ही दिव्य और भव्य है। वो इस देश की जड़ों से जुड़ी है, क्योंकि लॉर्ड मैकाले ने जब आए थे तो तब उन्होंने हमारी संस्कृति, शिक्षा और भाषा, इन तीनों पर घोर प्रहार किया और सैकड़ों वर्षों की गुलामी के थप्पड़ों ने हमको उस मानसिकता से उबरने नहीं दिया। लेकिन देश आज स्वाधीन है। हम लोग महसूस करते हैं कि तक्षशिला और नालंदा जैसे विश्वविद्यालय जिस देश में रहे हों, जहां पूरी दुनिया के लोग शिक्षा ग्रहण करने के लिए आते हों, आचार व्यवहार, संस्कार और जीवन मूल्यों को सीखने के लिए आते हों, तो ज्ञान और विज्ञान को भी वो यहाँ से लेकर के गए हैं और उसमें उन्होंने उसको आगे बढ़ाया है। और इसलिए जो ये नई शिक्षा नीति है, ये नई शिक्षा नीति जहाँ मातृभाषा के आधार पर खड़ी होगी, जहाँ जीवन मूल्यों के आधार पर खड़ी होगी, ये शिक्षा नीति नेशनल भी है, इंटरनेशनल भी है, इम्पैक्टफुल भी है, इंटरैक्टिव भी है, इनोवेटिव भी है, इंक्लूसिव भी है। और यदि इसकी खूबसूरती देखेंगे तो ये एक तरफ टैलेंट को ढूंढती है, खोजती है, उस टैलेंट का विकास करती है और उसको जो टैलेंट को विकसित करके और ये पेटेंट तक लेकर के जाती है। इसलिए शोध और अनुसंधान की दिशा में जहाँ नेशनल रिसर्च फाउंडेशन की स्थापना हो रही है, वहीं नेशनल एजुकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी फोरम का भी गठन हो रहा है। ये तकनीकी की दृष्टि से शीर्ष पर पहुंच सके, अंतिम छोर के व्यक्ति से लेकर के और विश्व के शिखर तक जाने का जो रास्ता है, वो रास्ता इस नई शिक्षा नीति में है। ज्ञान है, विज्ञान है, अनुसंधान है, नवाचार है, प्रौद्योगिकी है। और इसलिए पूरी दुनिया ने इस नई शिक्षा नीति को की न केवल प्रशंसा की, बल्कि तमाम दुनिया के देशों ने, मैं सोचता हूँ कैम्ब्रिज का जब मुझे पत्र आया और उन्होंने खुशी व्यक्त करते हुए कहा हो कि हम इसको लेकर के पूरी दुनिया में जाना चाहते हैं और ये विजनरी है और इसको कहा है कि ये गेम चेंजर का काम करेगी दुनिया के लिए, तो ये शिक्षा नीति में दुनिया के शीर्ष 100 से भी अधिक संस्थानों ने इसकी न केवल प्रशंसा की है, बल्कि कहा है कि ये एक नई दिशा देगी। मैं आपको धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूँ पाठक जी। आपने इस नई शिक्षा नीति पर पीछे के समय जब मैं देश का शिक्षा मंत्री था, उस समय आपने बहुत ही भव्य एक ग्रंथ नई शिक्षा नीति का जो निकाला था, अद्भुत है। तब मुझे महसूस हुआ कि नहीं, आप लोग इस देश के निर्माण में नींव पर खड़े होकर के केवल चर्चा नहीं करते हैं, केवल बात नहीं करना चाहते हैं, बल्कि निर्माण की नींव का पत्थर बनने की दिशा में भी काम करना चाहते हैं, काम कर रहे हैं। और इसलिए मेरे लिए ये सुखद विषय, क्योंकि आप ही के कोरोना काल में मुझे याद आता है जब आपने एक अभियान चलाया था और वो था विजयी भारत अभियान, और उस अभियान का शुभारंभ मैंने किया था। कोरोना काल में जिस तरीके से आप लोगों ने काम किया है मिलकर के, मैं आपकी पूरी टीम को बहुत बधाई देना चाहता हूं। और मुझे भरोसा है कि ये जो 15 दिन का जो आपका ये प्रशिक्षण हुआ है, ये पीआर सबसे महत्वपूर्ण होता है। ये संबंध बनाना और अपनी बात को वहां तक पहुंचाना और बीच के गैप को खत्म करना, ये उसमें सबसे बड़ी ताकत होती है। और जो मास कम्युनिकेशन के जो छात्र हैं, जो उससे जुड़े लोग हैं, उन दोनों लोगों को मैं बहुत बधाई देना चाहता हूं कि आपने इन 15 दिनों में एक भारत श्रेष्ठ भारत की कड़ी में, जहां सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास एक कड़ी में, सूत्र में, और जिसमें हमने कहा कि ये देश को विश्व गुरु बनाना है, और जिसमें मेक इन इंडिया, डिजिटल इंडिया, स्किल इंडिया, स्टार्टअप और स्टैंड अप जैसे चीजों का रास्ता बनाने का काम किया है। मैं ये समझता हूं कि ये अवसर आ गया है अब, जब देश को फिर खड़ा होना है अपने उसमें, और उन पीछे की चीजों को एक तरफ करके, हाँ पीछे मुड़ करके नहीं देखना है, लेकिन पीछे हमारे साथ क्या हुआ है उसको याद रखते हुए लंबी छलांग मारनी है, ताकि इस राष्ट्र को पूरे विश्व के शिखर पर हम पहुंचा सकें। शिक्षा मंत्रालय इसमें बहुत काम कर रहा है, और मैं समझता हूं कि ये दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा लोकतांत्रिक देश है, अद्भुत देश है हमारा, इसमें सभी प्रकार की शक्ति है। आज आप समापन के अवसर पर है, मुझे भरोसा है कि 15 दिन में जो हमने सीखा होगा उसको अपने जीवन में, अपने व्यवहार में अवतरित करके, उतार करके, और एक नई ताकत के रूप में हम एहसास कर सकें, अपने को भी एहसास कर सकें। और इस अवसर पर जो लोग जुड़े हुए हैं, एक जो आपका अंतर्राष्ट्रीय जनसंपर्क संगठन के चेयरमैन और नवाचार एवं प्रबंधन संस्थान के अध्यक्ष हैं, उनका भी मैं स्वागत कर रहा हूं। अजीत पाठक जी, आप राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष हैं पब्लिक रिलेशन सोसाइटी ऑफ इंडिया के, मैं आपको भी धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूं। और आपकी सोसाइटी के जो उपाध्यक्ष अनु मजुमदार जी हैं, नरेंद्र मेहता जी हैं, उन्मेष दीक्षित हैं, और श्री YS शर्मा जी हैं सेक्रेटरी जनरल, श्री Y बाप जी, सचिव कोषाध्यक्ष दिलीप चौहान, भारत के विभिन्न राज्यों के आपके चैप्टरों के अध्यक्ष हैं, सचिव हैं, प्रोफेसर हैं, जनसंपर्क अधिकारी हैं, और मास कम्युनिकेशन के तमाम लोग आज आपके साथ जुड़े हैं। मैं आपको शुभकामना दे रहा हूँ, नवमी की भी बहुत सारी बधाई देना चाहता हूँ, शुभकामना देना चाहता हूँ। बहुत अच्छे अवसर, अच्छे दिन पर आपका समापन हो रहा है। मेरी शुभकामना कि आप हमेशा खुश रहें और राष्ट्र के निर्माण की दिशा में एक योद्धा की तरह आप आगे बढ़ते जाएं। मैं आप सबको अभिनंदन कर रहा हूँ। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
We are grateful to all our dignitaries for gracing today's event. As this event draws to a close, I take this opportunity to express a heartfelt gratitude to the professors who have given lively and useful inputs to our students in their respective sessions over the past 15 days. And I appeal to all the students to take full advantage of these inputs given to you through this platform hosted by PRSI. With the Shara greetings to one and all once again, it is me, Anshu Mahajan, signing off and thanking you all once again for being there and making this orientation program a huge success. Namaskar.